Good morning, everyone. We are just waiting for a few more people to join, and then we will get cracking. I can see we've got someone else joining. Give us another 30 seconds, and then we'll get going. Cool. Just double check that everyone has all got audio. I believe there is just one person just connecting up audio, and then we will get going. Cool. Okay. Well, we'll crack on. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. And we're going to obviously talk to you a lot, mainly Costa and Jamie. We'll talk a lot around some of the emerging threats, social engineering tactics, some of the best practices that could be adopted, but as well as some of the threat detection services that are available. But to start off with, I obviously want to introduce myself. So I'm Mark Simmons. I'm one of the security business managers here at Bytes. I've been here for just over 5.5 years. I have the pleasure of running our NetSec and endpoint business, of which obviously strategic partner with Sophos. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Costa, who can start us going through some of the content today.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Mark. So yeah, good morning, everyone. My name's Costa. I'm a cybersecurity consultant here at Sophos. And what I'm just going to do today is very quickly run you through a bit of what we'd call a threat landscape. And then I'm going to hand over to Jamie Woodruff, who is our excellent guest speaker, ethical hacker. And he'll be going through a lot of the things that he's seen and actually some of the things that he's done as part of an ethical hacking career. So without further ado, just really want to start, as I think a lot of these types of webinars start, just really highlight that in the past couple of years, we know we've banged the drum several times that COVID's had a massive impact on how people are working. There's of course been that major shift in our environments. We're getting increasingly distributed working patterns, offices, homes, different regions of the world. But at the same time, despite being distributed, they're maintaining a greater level of interconnectivity than we've ever seen before. So just because the people have moved out of the offices and the data can be anywhere, it doesn't mean that we are not able to access them from different ways or means. So what we're actually seeing is, as a result, more and more organizations are looking towards AI, automation, and integration of services, because there are so many different bolt-on services that people are buying from the cloud. And actually, that's then making it harder for people to use them all at once. So whether it's integrations of single sign-on to make sure you've got a single pane to authenticate from, or whether that is to be used from an integration point to ingest loads of logs, we're seeing a big change there in how people have worked in the past 2 years. It's a big focus on it. But naturally, with that, when we look at cybersecurity, it too has had a very large shift. It's evolved from your basic stopping malware to what we'd consider full stock security operations requirements. So this hasn't just been driven by the growing volume of threats, but actually the sophistication and the speed at which these exist and take place, which actually in turn is very much driven by the change in the attack behavior that we're seeing. So we're no longer talking about a spray and pray approach. I guess many of you will no doubt be familiar with that, that terminology, where somebody just drops a payload, sends a phishing email or similar. What we're actually seeing is a combination of that, along with hands-on live keyboard hacking attempts. So an attempt to get around defenses in real time. Now, Jamie's going to talk a little bit around some examples of this, but if we take a very basic one, phishing email gets delivered, somebody clicks on a link, it connects to a command and control center, and somebody gains access to that PC remotely. That can happen all very quickly. So that means, from a defender perspective, if we're trying to secure our solutions, we've got to respond in almost near real time as well. But the net result of that ultimately is that, as you can see in the statistics that are at the top, 61% increase in cyber threats overall over the previous year. There's still a very high proportion of organizations being hit by ransomware, and this doesn't just come in the flavors of outright encryption tactics. And what's really interesting from some of the surveys that we've done is that we're finding a lot of organizations are now basically saying that the attacks are too advanced or complicated for them to deal with. And we see this very much replicated in the news. There is constant alerts of a new vulnerability, a new type of threat that somebody's taken advantage of, and it's affected even our local shops where they're having to close due to even parts of the business that they use, maybe from a supply chain perspective. And the interesting part for me of this is that actually a lot of the time, yes, we do see cyber gangs and criminals who lead the approach for this, but there has been a big shift over to ransomware as a service as well. So these payloads are effectively delivered by affiliate actor groups as opposed to the groups themselves. On the dark web, there's things like SLAs, help desk ticketing systems where people can go and buy their payload and use it to target an organization. So again, a very big difference from what we would have seen if we consider WannaCry, for example, back in 2017, which was almost an accident in the way that it spread because there was no hands-on keyboard attack that followed directly after the clicking of a link, for example, whereas these now are payloads to get you in and payloads so that you can maintain persistence, do reconnaissance in the environment, and move on to delivering the actual payload itself. And we do very much see this reflected in what we'd consider playbooks for ransomware. So I'm by no means going to talk all the way through this, but as you can see here, we start off at initial access and execution. That could be the delivery of a phishing email or similar. And from there on out, the bad guy, once they're connected, they're looking to make sure they solidify the permissions that they've got. They start to hide in their defense evasion tactics. They might use local tools on a device. They might use penetration testing tools. They might do what a normal individual would do on a device to follow those patterns to evade detection, up until the point where they get all the way over to the lateral movement piece and impact, where ultimately they're spreading themselves across the network before delivering that final payload. And when we see some timescales or percentages applied to this, notice that there's a rather large focus on the initial reconnaissance and getting in. So initial access, execution there, and persistence take up 64% of a ransomware playbook from what we have seen. Thereafter, they move really quickly. Once they're in, they want to make sure that they've gained that persistence. They've got a means to get back in if something happens. They've got accounts that allow them to do more malicious activity in the environment, access things that aren't necessarily just as local resources, maybe capture some credentials, steal some MFA cookies. They're doing whatever they can to make it a lot harder for you to recover when they do deliver that payload. And some of that might even involve deleting your backups, locking you out of your own accounts, and similar. And really, a lot of this has ultimately come from what we deem as a bit of a legacy approach to cybersecurity solutions. I'm not again going to talk through this chain in depth, but when we think about what we said at the very beginning with the way that the landscape has changed, we need to be able to adopt to that. And a lot of cybersecurity solutions are very much still in silo. So they don't have integrations. They are very much manually driven. And if they're manually driven, that means that we need people to drive them. And if we haven't got the people or the skills to drive them, we then effectively maybe miss a load of noise. If we don't have the people to deal with the responses, then we could end up at the point where we end up being compromised. So when we do get to the end of such a chain of considering legacy security approaches, the question that we ultimately do need to ask ourselves is, how have we improved our security since the beginning of all this change? Are we doing something that we've got visibility over everything that we are now maintaining in the cloud and through various third-party suppliers, for example? But if I just bring this back towards what we're looking to cover with Jamie today from an ethical hacking perspective, there has to be a really big focus here on the pressure tactics, the extortion piece, as we've got here, the human touch. If you have got a user in your environment, which everybody does, they are your most valuable asset. They are the people that are doing the work for you, but they are also the people that are targeted the most. And again, Jamie's going to cover some of this in great depth in some of the examples that we can go through. But if we just consider the aspect of, if you are threatened with some sensitive data of your own to reveal your company data, you might be quite willing to cooperate so that you're not embarrassed online, for example. They start targeting your own emails, your own passwords, then suddenly you might cooperate again a little bit more than if you were just seeing it through your work email. But extortion takes a lot of different forms, and at this point, I think it's probably a great place to hand over to Jamie. Jamie is an ethical hacker. So Jamie, I'm going to just stop my presentation over here, give you presenter mode, and hopefully you should be able to share your screen from here on out.
Yeah, perfect. I'll just get things moving. There we go. Be able to see my screen now. Costa, can you just confirm?
We can indeed, and it's now in
Perfect.
presentation mode.
Okay, let's move this down here. It's got a very large resolution, so I've had to shrink it down for you guys. So I'm Jamie Woodruff. I've worked in cybersecurity for a very long time. I'll give you a very brief introduction. Briefly, I started hacking when I was 9 years old. Went through school, college, got expelled several times from different institutions, went to university, hacked major social media sites and gave all my exploits back to companies around the world and large organizations, and kind of built a name for myself. So very brief introduction there. Sat all my cybersecurity exams, sat majority of them when I was 17, 18, and a couple more exams as well in my early 20s. Now I consult large organizations around the world. I teach them primarily different social engineering techniques and measures, and kind of new and upcoming threats and new ways into an organization. As Costas said previously, the landscape's completely changed, you know, especially over the months, let alone years, in the way that attacks are kind of carried out. And we'll cover some of that in the evolution slide here. So back in 97, you know, it was all about viruses, malicious code, Trojans, advanced worms. I remember the first ever piece of malware that I played with was some malware called Sub7. It's now archived on Wikipedia, so you can see how that kind of worked. So back in the kind of early days for me, you know, it was all about exploration, right? I didn't care about the financial gains from cybersecurity. You know, I didn't steal data and resell it. I didn't make any money from it at all initially. It was just the fact that, you know, I was one of very little people that could explore that particular type of landscape in such a unique fashion or unique way. So what kind of got me into cybersecurity? Being autistic, I'd always kind of resonated with technology. So I'd always focused primarily on technology growing up, taking things apart, TVs, you know, you name it, microwaves, like all sorts of stuff. I'd always been interested in the science elements, you know, making like potassium nitrate and bottle rockets when I was like 8 years old with my father and mother and stuff. So it always kind of stuck with me to have that particular type of background. 2004 to 2007, it was all about identity theft. So, you know, your data is freely traded online for around about 78 pence, and that's your first name, last name, social security, national insurance numbers, PayPal accounts, and they even guarantee nowadays a minimum balance of $2,500 before they particularly sell your type of account. So bypassing different types of security measures, even in this day and age, a lot of people don't use MFA or 2FA in a sense. You know, they just have one password that they've kind of stuck with for a long period of time, or an email account that's followed them throughout their life that there's a dozen things, you know, hundreds of things signed up to. And again, as Costa was saying, you know, one of the main methods is to break into them email accounts, recover existing accounts, you know, such as your PayPal or any financial kind of control that you might utilize, and then take ownership of that and essentially, you know, extort you for a particular amount of money to be able to gain access back to that. 2007 to 2010, it was all about botnets. So this was like the very early age. I mean, ransomware in a sense had been around since like the late 80s. We saw the AIDS virus that was distributed on 20,000 floppy disks, I believe, at that time, was sent to different locations around the world, and then, you know, infected them particular research institutes, and then adapted over the years to where now, you know, we're seeing ransomware. I think it's like once every 90 seconds, once every 9 seconds, an organization is being affected by ransomware. So it's a massive scale. And again, the dangerous elements to it, and we'll cover them in the next few slides, is the fact that it's so easily accessible. You know, you don't need to have knowledge to be able to create ransomware. You can get step-by-step guided tutorials for minimum money to be able to teach an individual to do it. There's been cases, especially at the end of last year, where employees inside of an organization was disgruntled. One organization in particular in Germany, they employed 750 employees, and this particular person didn't get a pay rise, and he tried to deploy ransomware on the corporate network. Luckily, they had stuff in place, and the attack was not successful. But again, you know, he worked as a financial controller, so he wasn't very technical in that sense. 2010 to kind of 2022 and where we're going. So with social engineering, I mean, everything evolves around social engineering in my eyes, right? It's one of the easiest ways to break into any organization is via the employee side, so via the human side to security. Yes, there's a considerable amount of automated attacks that do get carried out and conducted, but at the end of the day, if someone's, someone's payday is like a few £1 million, they will sit there for a long period of time to be able to, extract information about your organization and then break in via using that methodology. And then current state of affairs. So going back to kind of a lot of foreign exchanges like crypto exchanges now that are popping up all the way around the world. Facebook did the recent one where they did their video. Mark Zuckerberg talked about the metaverse, and that literally led to thousands and thousands of fake crypto coins being created, fake white pages published online, Facebook's new meta coin that's bogus. But again, a large amount of people was investing in these types of coins and investing in this type of technology that they thought was genuine. And I think there's an estimated so far since that meta video release, Gartner stated that around about $19.4 million had been stolen from individuals just creating these fake exchanges or these fake particular coins. Stuff like going back to identity theft now, it's relatively easy to take over someone's identity. Again, with very minimal or little knowledge, you can find out what phone provider a person's with just by knowing their number. The first 5 digits you can type into Google, which will tell you where the store the mobile came from, in a sense, or what general vicinity, a bit like a sort code. And then you can also then ring that individual up and say, hey, I'm talking from Free or I'm talking from O2. You already know this information because it's publicly available, and then build up a rapport with that individual. So your bill's due, majority of people's like the end of the month or the first of the month. Try and extract information. You can even ring up the phone providers like O2 now and again. We're seeing this targeted a lot with celebrities. We're ringing up, say, O2 as an example, pretending to be that individual, recovering or getting a duplicate SIM. So saying, hey, I've just got a new smartwatch, like an Apple Watch. I wondered if I could order a duplicate SIM for it. And a lot of providers will distribute or dispatch a duplicate SIM. That SIM would then be intercepted during the delivery process, or potentially account details changed to be sent to a different location, and then you can start recovering MFA codes. So like any of your accounts that you've got signed up with your telephone number, when you do forget password or etc., and it goes back to that particular telephone number. That's one of the main methods now to break into accounts that's becoming readily and easily available and accessible. Stuff like phone hijacking, so deploying, Sophos did a really good security research piece that they released quite recently, talking about this side of things. So utilizing some applications that have actually got way more permissions than what they should have access to, but in the background, they're either mining cryptocurrencies or they're extracting information to be sold to third-party organizations like marketing agencies, etc., and then making money from you just essentially playing that. And point of sale attacks, so till systems, a lot of till systems in industries, especially catering and hospitality, are very outdated. The systems have worked for a long period of time. Why should I replace them? And that's the mindset. There was a hotel that I was doing work with the back end of November last year in Lancashire in northwest England, and they were running, all running Windows 7, no patches at all, because obviously it's unsupported. And they got infected with ransomware via their till systems, and that got distributed across the hotel chain. So it infected around about 11 different hotels and grinded them to a halt for around about 14 days. So everything was pen and paper, back to the kind of books in that sense. Even in one of the particular hotels, you couldn't access the rooms because it was all using kind of NFC technology, and their systems was locked out. So they had to use the fire systems to be able to open all the doors, and they had to come up with a solution for that. And then cyber warfare, so again, state-sponsored attacks, they're becoming a lot more prominent, especially moving forward, utilizing 0 days that have been out there for a long period of time, and then using them to break in or facilitating different types of attacks. And a lot of these stuff are being released onto the dark web for people to gain access, utilize, and build from. So who was hacked this month? So we've got the ICRC, so the International Committee for the Red Cross Foundation. 500,000 vulnerable people's details were stolen in this type of attack. 2,000 staff logins and volunteers, their details was also stolen. Their pictures, where they've been, their online blogs in the Red Cross Foundation, literally every piece of information about them was stolen. critical systems to this day are still offline. So there's a lot of vulnerable people that don't have access to the stuff that they need access to. There's a lot of volunteers that are deployed in different locations. You know, we've seen the crisis that's happening currently. I won't go into details because I'm not a political person, but again, you know, utilizing services like Red Cross in that particular type of threat is going to be quite huge and massive. But the fact that they have restricted systems, again, you know, damages an individual access to that. And they were using outdated servers that were unpatched. So again, not doing patch management, very basic stuff in cybersecurity. I always talk about it being a bit like personal hygiene. You know, nowadays we wash our hands all the time. You know, we have regular access to hand sanitizer. It's just something that's been drummed into us by the media to do. We should have essentially done it beforehand, but we didn't really take it seriously. So, you know, just stuff like that should be applied to an organization. You should have that very basic hygiene in the sense of, okay, locking down, you know, via group policies, for instance, for like USB devices, external devices, etc., and then making a list of overall what you need to protect inside your infrastructure, and then kind of work backwards in that sense. So the Commission on Elections, the Republic of the Philippines, was hacked again. It was hacked very early, I think it was 2016 off the top of my head. And there was 55 million voter details stolen, first names, last names, house addresses, who they voted for. So much personal identifiable information was stolen in that previous attack. And then this month again, they've been hacked again. So usernames and pins of vote counting machines have been stolen. Very serious security flaws have been discovered, and there's been a joint oversight committee, an emergency committee formed. One of the presidential candidates that are running for presidency has started this committee to look into how this type of attack could occur. And another one as well this month, so Final Site, web solutions for schools. You know, around about 8,000 plus schools globally were completely shut down online, so no virtual learning at all, which again in this day and age is very, you know, very serious, because a lot of our schools are still using and adapting the online learning types environments, especially with kids with like social anxiety or disorders not able to come back into, you know, not integrated back into society yet, or back into school, is utilizing these types of technologies. And that was done via a ransomware attack. Now, luckily, no data was stolen, well, according to what they say, from any pupil data or any kind of school data. And what they think happened is they wanted their Final Site corporate data, so they went after that particular organization themselves, you know, and that was just a mess that was left over. But even like ransomware, again, so, you know, there was very early versions, as I said, back in the late 90s, there was one first created, the AIDS one, and then kind of adapted from there. But it's just so readily available. You know, it infects a business every 9 seconds. Literally every 9 seconds, an organization around the world is being infected with ransomware. You know, it costs the world around about 15 billion pounds in 2021. That number is expected to rise to 196 billion by 2031. So again, as we're like adapting the green technology, we're going to have to spend a lot more in that particular field as well. In 2021, 54% of all ransomware attacks were successful. However, 39% of attacks were intercepted before they could encrypt any data or extract any data. This means that anti-ransomware software like Sophos Intercept X, which I'm sure Costa will talk about towards the end, is stopping a significant amount of attacks. And again, you know, there's been organizations, you know, especially with the remote working element, I've just seen ransomware go absolutely crazy since COVID-19. Because a lot of these companies and organizations, they weren't ready for that type of transition. You know, they didn't have the relevant procedures, policies, etc., or accounts externally in place. A lot of these organizations didn't even have any external VPNs to utilize for their you know, internal environments. But again, luckily, a lot of people started to transition and adapt towards cloud services like Office 365 as a prime example. And on average as well, victims of ransomware only recover around 65% of stolen data after paying the ransom, mostly due to the technical faults in the ransom itself. So, for instance, again, going back to what I said previously, the fact that it's readily available, anyone can access it, anyone can go on the dark web, as we can see in the next one. They can purchase their own ransomware kit for as little as £35 per month. And then essentially that's maintained by the threatened individuals that are creating these types of software. Even some of them take a percentage and cut from victims that you infect. So they help you from a marketing strategy perspective, how best to distribute that ransomware. You know, is it via kind of pirated websites? You know, is it via like social media? So creating these fake coins and fake exchanges, you know, targeting specific industries with stuff that they'll, you know, need to utilize, whether that's third-party vendors or suppliers. And then the average cost again to recover from ransomware attack in 2021 was 1.15 million for organizations that paid the ransom. So it's quite a large amount of money. And I dealt with an organization. They deal with we'll say sports holidays. I don't really want to say the particular sport because you'll know which organization it is, but deal with sport holidays for people, right? And their managing director was very old school in his approach to anything really technologically related. We used to say, like, get rid of my passwords. I don't want any of that. Like, I don't want this MFA, and would literally stamp down the fact that he does not want that stuff. Got hit with ransomware, so I helped with the cleanup process. Told them exactly how they was able to get in, etc. Didn't do any of the patch recommendations. Didn't do any of the recommendations that we'd said. 6-7 months later, got hit with the exact same ransomware and had to do the entire process all over again. And in both instances, they paid the ransom, which was the first initial ransom was £250,000, which they paid, and the second one was £940,000, which they paid. So again, you can only take a horse to water, right? You can't essentially make it drink. So, and I saw this one recently as well. So this is very good. So Sophos released this towards the back end of last year. They was working with one of their clients. They haven't made any details publicly available, given the fact that a lot of people don't want to be online waving the flag saying, "Hey, we've been attacked with ransomware." But this just goes to show the process. So back when I was growing up, we was the digital Bankses of the kind of cyber world, right? We'd spray our digital graffiti and we'd move on. I mean, in one night alone, you could hack hundreds of thousands of websites around the world just in one night. It's so simplistic and easy to do. Even in this day and age, it's simplistic and easy to do. So what you'd do is you'd find a 0-day or some type of malware that hasn't essentially been detected yet. So I used to target like large forums for like health visitors and stuff like that because they had a lot of juicy information that you could look through. And you'd move on to your target, right? So it'd be in and out, in and out. That's it. Literally destroy, in and out, go. Nowadays, people will sit on your infrastructure for a massive, massive period of time. If they think their payday is going to be massive, they will just sit there because data is far more valuable than currency. So in this particular instance, an employee clicked a phishing email, which again is really common. A lot of organizations are still not using any types of kind of phishing software to help prevent it, or any external resource, even backups. A lot of people think, well, I'm on Office 365, I don't need a backup because that's a backup. It's not a backup. I think your data is retained for a very short period of time, and even after 30 days, you can't recover deleted emails unless you're on a massively enterprise grade package. And then 8 weeks into it, the attackers installed and ran PowerView to perform network reconnaissance and cobalt strike. So, actual penetration testing tools that are designed to help organizations find their flaws are being used in such a way that it shows the flaws for the malicious individuals that they can then utilize inside that network. And then 9 to 10 weeks, so all went completely quiet. It's likely the attackers were initial access brokers and were just looking for a suitable buyer now to sell their credentials. And again, so, ransomware as a service is becoming absolutely massive. All this year, you will just see in the media ransomware, 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 because people don't have the time, the patience, nor the resources to be able to patch their entire environment. So they're relying a lot on third-party vendors, which is very important, but they're not actually understanding or utilizing different groups and departments inside the organizations and what data they need access to. So it's almost like a free-for-all landscape still. And then 11 weeks into it, a new attacker purchased the access credentials. They installed Cobalt Strike onto machines again, so began collecting information, finding different exploits, different patches, etc. And then 3 months, so literally 3 months in, the attackers unleashed ransomware at 4 a.m. local time. So again, studying the company, what time are they in business, what time did they leave the business, who's going to be working at night, who's going to be working on the weekends. If we look at kind of the Bangladeshi bank hack again, they waited until it was like a public holiday, so they had the Friday, the Saturday, the Sunday, and the Monday to conduct their type of attack before anyone would essentially notice it. So not just hi, bye, it's study every element of your infrastructure, every element of what you do as a business. And then demanded 2.5 million in ransom. And I don't think these guys paid the ransom. Sure, Costa can let us know. I couldn't really find anything on it at all because, obviously this particular company didn't start waving the flag saying we've been attacked. So maybe at the end, Costa can clarify that for my own.
I'll just chime in now. This was actually from our rapid response team. So they called in our rapid response team to help them remediate. They did not pay the ransom.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Costa. Good to know. And again, do not pay the ransom because, as going back to previously, you're very likely to not get all your data back in a sense. And a lot of people, let's say they conduct a massive amount of attacks, they'll just leave you to one side and essentially carry on, conducting attacks. So don't pay the ransom. You just put in a band-aid over a gaping wound, if that makes sense. Gaping wound. But even kind of like how ransomware has evolved in a sense. So, it's been translated to different languages around the world. A lot of ransomware providers provide free live chat now, so you can actually talk to the malicious individuals. They will teach you how to buy cryptocurrencies and be able to get your files back. But again, just don't pay the ransom. Consult local authorities like Action Fraud, the National Crime Agency if you're based here in the United Kingdom. And overseas, you can contact Interpol, Europol. They have loads of different services available for you guys to utilize. But even the colonial pipeline, so these guys got hacked last year, and this is a massive multi-billion-pound organization. So during that crisis, during that time, the average price of fuel was at the highest in the USA since 2014 at £2.11 per gallon. 5,500 miles of pipeline network completely shut down. At one point, these guys were flying helicopters up and down the pipeline, right? They had no idea what happened. They thought there was some type of leak or something that had occurred or a natural disaster, etc. They were just flying helicopters to try and figure out what could occur, what has occurred. It supplies nearly half of the East Coast in fuel. North Carolina declared a state of emergency and suspended all fuel regulations for vehicles. And 5 days after the attack, there was still no sign of sharing any information with the CISA, which is a unit in the Department of Homeland Security. So again, what do we do? What do we do? What's this type of scenario? What's this strategy? What do we do? And that's how a lot of organizations kind of react to it, because they don't have contingencies in place in that sense. They haven't run through different scenarios. There's a lot of organizations that I know that utilize third-party backup companies, such as Datto as an example, but think, I have this kind of installation, I'm covered, I'm fine. But if something happens, how do you recover from it? How do you get your data back? What is the time period that you're looking at? What is your retention periods, etc.? And then again, the Colonial never notified the CISA. The FBI actually had to notify them. And suspected social engineering-based attack on outdated legacy software, and also utilizing an ex-employee's account that hadn't been removed. So they was able to VPN in and then deploy the ransomware. And again, the FBI confirmed that it was DarkSide ransomware that was responsible for compromising the Colonial pipeline networks, and they continue to work with the government and partners in the investigation. And then Ziggy ransomware. So I always put this one in because it's quite weird, is the cyber landscape, right? You have anyone that works in security has, in my eyes, that's really, really good and lives and breathes it, has some element wrong with them, whether it's a social element, whether it's kind of autism from like my perspective. But you don't just learn it, right? You're born into it, you live it, you breathe it. It's just natural for you to do. And Ziggy, this guy here, lives in a third world country, had hardly any money. He made his own ransomware on a very outdated machine, like talking very, very early. I think he posted a picture and it had 2 gig of RAM it was running. It was like absolutely insanity. Made his ransomware, deployed it to run about 922 businesses around the world, was able to make millions, and then Bitcoin went through the roof. So he literally tripled his profits of what he'd made over that time period. So he took his profits out and he paid all the companies back that he'd hacked or attacked, give them all the money back and said sorry. He even released the 922 decryption keys that the victims needed to recover their data. And then turned around to them and said, look, I'm really sorry. I'm going to be a ransomware hunter. Like, I apologize. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, etc. There's still arrest warrants out for Ziggy. But nowadays he posts a lot of stuff on Reddit and different places, explaining new types of threats and ransomware that are kind of coming out. So it just shows the mindset again. This individual was motivated with the fact that he had nothing and he just wanted something. Whereas some people are motivated by kind of corporate espionage or reselling that data to another organization that might want it, like competitors as an example. So again, and then I know briefly Costa covered kind of WannaCry, but I think it's really important because this is the one of the world's largest ransomware attacks that occurred back in 2017. 230,000 computers globally across 150 countries was infected. At the time, I was on a flight back from Google headquarters in Kitchener, Canada, flying back to Manchester in the northwest of England. And I had numerous missed phone calls when the news broke and stuff. And one of them was a large kind of gas organization that have like petrol forecourts around Europe and the UK. And he said to me, Jamie, none of my customers have any Bitcoin. I was like, well, I very much doubt that they do, right? It was like early days in a sense. It wasn't really out there in that sense. So he said, well, all my coffee machines in my petrol stations are pouring milk and coffee out, well, milk and water out, but we're unsure why. And these guys had the Costa coffee machines. They were on phone support with Costa for a long period of time. Got hit with WannaCry, and yeah, it cost them a couple of million to recover from the actual process. But they should have systems in place to segregate the networks, in a sense, and make sure that they are segmented and people can't access stuff that they shouldn't have access to. But just goes to show even large organizations that turn over billions of pounds don't have the right required resources. 19,000 appointments within the NHS had to be cancelled. So you imagine, again, something like this occurred during COVID-19, how many more lives would essentially be lost, It estimated 4 billion in damages globally to, including the cleanup process. But even threat actors targeting employees inside your organization, hey, if you can install this demonware ransomware in your company, I'll pay you 40% of whatever they pay me. So doing a research on employees, finding out the people that post on social media like, I don't like work, I hate it, just because, again, they will target them, but over a long period of time, they'll find the right person. This one at the end of last year, is promising a payout for an individual once they deployed the ransomware inside the organization, started a WhatsApp chat message, Telegram, or Signal to be able to persuade them to deploy the ransomware. So not only the kind of shotgun approach where you just shoot and you just fire and hopefully hit something, physically doing the research on employees, finding the weakest employees, which again, you can find a lot from public available data, and then targeting them to deploy this in their type of industry. But it always falls back to the human error, no matter what, right? Whether that's misconfiguration, whether that's not employing the right individual for the right task, whether that's putting so much kind of constraint on one individual, doing outside their job role of what they're supposed to be doing. So maybe they've adapted the cybersecurity, maybe they've adapted the database type of approach, stuff that's outside their remit. And again, mistakes happen, So I just want to show you something relatively quickly. So this is supposed to be critical national infrastructure. So this is a facility containing nuclear material. Anyone can go on Google and type in a very specific thing into Google that will allow you to find these types of facilities, full CCTV access to these types of facilities. Now, this is supposed to be critical national infrastructure, right? You're not supposed to be able to see this at all. You even have the actual motion maps. So for instance, you've got the kind of fire plans, the layouts, the schematics for the actual buildings. So you can actually see all the way around. And again, critical national infrastructure, but misconfigured, So a person has misconfigured the port to be open externally. There is no username, there is no password, there is no authentication. Anybody with a mobile phone can find this on Google just by typing a specific thing. So I contacted iCatcher. I was like, hey, you guys, you need to fix it, And it was like, it ain't our fault, right? It's these facilities' fault. So they're the ones that are supposed to have, patched it and kept it on, kept it offline in a sense. And they just passed the blame from one person to another person to another person. So again, this is something that we have to deal with. So what is social engineering? It's part of the process is to define the end goal and motivation. It's to do the online reconnaissance side of things. So looking for your employees' social media histories like Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, any account that they've signed up to. I want to get fit on Monday. I'm going to lose weight. I'm going to sign up to a keto website. Keto is very bad. I've been on it for the last few weeks. It's not nice. So signing up to a site and getting that positive kind of assurance and motivation, but leaving your data there, because I put my weight on that site, right? Or I put my date of birth on this different site, and all this data can be stuck together in one kind of resource setting to be able to extract profiles about you or your employees. Profile physical and human targets and online reconnaissance as well, looking through your on your website, what suppliers do you have, who do you work with, what are your clients, do you post them publicly available for people to see because you want to show off the fact that you've won this particular deal, inside your news blogs, etc. What are you posting, what information are you sharing? And all this information can be used by a malicious individual to target your organization. Gathering information offline again, so go into like town halls, local planning offices, etc. Seeing if you've acquired any new buildings or if you're doing any work on any additional buildings. So maybe I turn up with my CSCS card and say, hey, I'm a builder to work on site today, and just plant something, to be able to extract information. Overcome moral or ethical dilemmas and then launch my attack. And these are just some of the attacks here, like phone spoofing, so impersonating an individual into revealing sensitive information. Diversion tactics, so coming up with a scenario to get an individual away from their device. And again, you need, I think it's like 8 to 14 seconds with a laptop to be able to extract key information with a USB pen. And these USB pens, like rubber ducks as an example, can be purchased online for next to nothing and freely available for anyone to utilize with little knowledge of how they work. Phishing attacks, baiting, so dropping branded USB pens with your company logo on it near your kind of parking garages, right? So in receptions or third-party organizations that you work with, or even following you to a meeting without you knowing, deploying a USB pen on the floor saying like JP Morgan with their logo, confidential salaries or bonuses stuck on the USB pen. One employee will pick that up and think, wow, I have a policy that clearly states I should not plug this in, but it says confidential, so I want to see what it is before I actually give it in. And that's all it takes, is that one employee if you don't have the right policy or procedure in place. Eavesdropping, listening to conversations, badge surfing, man-in-the-middle based attacks, tailgating, so following employees through security doors or entry points within different types of infrastructures, QR code based attacks, pretexting, producing a very good fabricated story and sticking to that particular story. Quid pro quo, so a promise of exchange of information. Could be, again, you've researched an employee, you know they're not happy with a particular individual. So, saying, hey, I can help you get them out the way if you just do me a favor, but obviously in a much more kind of non-subtle way in a sense. Scareware, bombarding victims with fake malware attacks. And again, this is on the rise as well. We've seen a lot of this last year. So targeting a specific infrastructure with hundreds and thousands of malware-based attacks that we know are going to be detected, that have already been detected by AV vendors. But if you have like a SIEM solution, all of a sudden you have like 20,000 open tickets, right? Because they're very messy, a lot of them, if they aren't configured correctly. By the time you find the real threat, they've already got the information that's needed and already left. But even stuff like this becoming more prominent. So this was 26 million stolen from United Arab Emirates Bank with the help of AI-enhanced voice simulation. So deep fake audio. So when you go and do press releases, or your senior executive inside your organization talks on YouTube or talks at different settings and scenes, you can extract keywords or letters from the way that they're talking and synthesize an entire voice that sounds pretty much identical to them. And in this particular instance, it involved around about 17 different people. They fooled the bank employee, because the bank employee, they knew, talked to this individual all the time, and this guy would always request money transferred, etc., and it was authorized to do so. So again, massive, fascinating development of the 21st century. And the technology is available on the deep web to purchase, and public-facing torrent websites as well. Or even deep fake videos. So Europol's currently investigating a case which involved a 24-year-old high-profile female based within Europe. A video was created that almost certainly looked very, very real. The parents of the high-profile victim was extorted out of £1.2 million. The video threatened to be distributed using social media sites, botting, etc. And Facebook are always like, yeah, we'll shut it down, like we shut these fake sites down. And no, it doesn't work like that. There is so much stuff that slips through the cracks. They've grown to such a large extent. They don't have a lot of the stuff in place to be able to prevent against this type of information being distributed. And again, it was created with very minimal technology. You can go on the App Store and download an app that makes you do this one on the right, the original and deep fake. That's the original individual, and then he looks pretty much identical to Tom Cruise. Even the mouth movements, the eyebrows, the flicker, the wind in the hair, all this can be easily replicated. And again, someone that's elderly, for I won't say any ages, but elderly, in a sense that hasn't adapted or grown up with technology, they're not going to distinguish or understand what this actually is. So it won't be long before, stuff like FaceTime, a new laptop Intel have just released where you can actually use iMessages. They did a proof of concept and use FaceTime on a Windows-based machine. So you imagine the implications of that, being able to utilize virtual webcam software or virtual software to trick an individual that you're talking to, thinking that you're on an actual video call with the right person. The voice is synthesized in order to extract. And all these tools are available for people to utilize. Even stuff like Creepy, so anyone can download this. It's a geolocation OSINT tool. So, putting first name, last name, email, or social media profiles into this type of software will pull all the longitude and latitude of your posts that you've made publicly available and compile it into a report. So go on your social media profiles after this. You know, it's so important. Make sure they're restricted. Check your privacy settings. You know, go through them, because that's the first place I look if I'm targeting an organization. Forget the organization. I want to know the people. You know, I want to live and breathe what they're doing. I want to understand their roles and responsibilities. I want to see what they're doing in their personal life and their personal environment. You know, and I have all the patience in the world to sit there for a long period of time to be able to extract that information. Stuff like ID printers. Here's me, Joseph the waiter. You know, I dress up in different uniforms to conduct my types of attacks. This one here at the Luton Hoo Hotel, there was 2,500 security researchers that was tending to watch the speakers speak. So I was like, what's the one thing that I could do to like mess with them in a sense? Spoke to a senior executive at the Luton Hoo, got a whole uniform to be a member of staff. Was due to speak at 7 p.m, but they had like a picture with really long beard and long hair of me up. Kind of listened to their stories throughout the day, learned so many secrets, found out a leading bank with a red logo had failed a security audit because the CISO was drunk at this particular event. And then shared it all on the stage at the end. So I stood on stage with pots and pans and plates and stuff, and it was like, get off the stage, Jamie's due to speak, and I put him down. I was like, no, I'm Jamie Woodruff, let's talk about you. And I'm surprised there wasn't loads of NDAs distributed everywhere. Or stuff like Royal Mail. So I have FedEx, DPD, UPS, different courier services that I use to break into an organization. How many people would physically stop an individual, you know, like me, for instance, dressed wearing a Royal Mail outfit with an actual handheld scanner, carrying actual packages? How many would physically stop them and say, right, who do you work for? I want to see your identification. I'm going to escort you around the premises. Nobody cares. They're like ghosts, you know. We have a job to do. They have a job to do. So we just leave them to it. And that's the dangers, you know. All it takes is the right uniform in the right setting to walk into an organization. Sometimes I'll go in and do a fake job interview, you know, and as soon as you walk in reception, you have that alarm panels. So it'll be like, service by what company? So I'll just do research, you know, I'll spoof the phone call to the organization in question, pretend I'm there to service the alarm, turn up a week later to service the alarm, and I have full game access to anything that I need. Even stuff like this, so spoof card can be downloaded from the App Store by anybody. So you can call anybody in the audience, this virtual audience now, with their own telephone number, and the courier services, certain courier service will believe that you're calling voicemail. So if you don't have a voicemail pin, it's so easy to listen to people's voicemails remotely just by using software that's on the App Store for anyone to use, you know. You can also impersonate, so I can call you from your son's number, your daughter's number, it'll show up with their name, it'll show up as a missed call identical to them. And anyone can use this software. So you don't need to be technical capable in a sense of how things work or how they build, or you don't have to sit there back in the old days of Perl and everything else and Python trying to create the next big thing. All this stuff is available for anyone to use. But it always falls back to the misconfiguration or the human element to security. Again, you can have all the technology in the world and it's really important, but you need to educate your staff. You need to teach your staff that threats like me exist, you know, that threats out there in the wild do want to target your organization, do want to steal your data, do want to resell that data, and by any means necessary, they will be able to achieve that goal. Always make sure you have patch management. Always make sure you utilize vendors such as Costa. You know, they have some wonderful software that you guys could use. A lot of my clients I recommend towards Sophos. Again, because they have the patience, you know, that nurturing element to it. It's not just pushing an image onto you. It's learning about your infrastructure, what you guys need to utilize, you know, and even what you guys have, which again is important. So thank you for listening to me speak. Unfortunately, we didn't have much time today. You know, if in person, it'd be a lot more funner because I could play on you guys in the audience and stuff. But given the fact that it's a kind of a virtual approach, I hope you've enjoyed it. I'm going to pass it back to Costa now, and I think we're going to do some Q&As. So if you have any questions, feel free to fire them across to us in the chat message, but I'll let Costa take over from here. So thank you.
Thanks, Jamie. That was awesome. So I'm just going to get my screen shared again. If you can give me a thumbs up when that comes back up, Jamie. Brilliant, thank you. So guys, I hope everybody enjoyed that so far. I guess just as a bit of a finishing piece here, one of the things we just really want to reiterate to really reinforce a lot of the points that Jamie's been talking about is that we really need to take steps towards a security solution today that works in this interconnected yet somehow disparate environment. So there's a lot of things that Jamie's talked about that, yes, he can get around users, individuals by ethically hacking them, as it were. But at the end of the day, they will be then using credentials or sitting in front of somebody's PC to try and exfiltrate data or similar. So when it does come to putting in systems around this, then ultimately visibility is very, very key. But if we're investing in visibility tools, like Jamie has said, a SIEM solution or more, we need to have something that builds the context around that. And there's plenty of solutions these days that will apply the AI context to make sure that we are able to find those needles in that ever larger amount of hay that is being put on that haystack. Quite simply, we can't apply a context to something if we don't know what the activity relates to. So if we are then looking at that type of technology or scenario, invest in threat intelligence, buy in resources that have threat intelligence fed in, whether that is around CVEs, whether it's just industry intelligence, or even nation state activity. Again, we want to be in a place where we've got that intelligence to know what that visibility is giving us so we can find those needles in the haystacks. But really today, one of the final things I really want to talk about is just incident response. Should the worst happen, should Jamie get into your environment dressed as the person who's going to service your alarm system, you need to be able to have an incident response in place. And that isn't always necessarily to do with out and out cybersecurity. However, the context of today is very much around that. With so many places where our data is, our IP, our customer data, and anything else that might be valuable to us, prevention is better than response. However, part of those tactical response actions may well be part of that required prevention. So whilst we're on the topic of incident response, I won't go through this in a huge amount of depth. I think it's really important for every single organization to have a strong incident response plan. And again, this doesn't always need to be related directly to cybersecurity, but in the context that we're at today, think about this from securing your users' perspective. A lot of this is really easy. Identifying key stakeholders, assets, deploying protection, investigation tools, again, making sure you've got visibility over all of these things. But coming back to what Jamie said, educating your users is a hugely strategic approach here. As we talked about, they are your most single targeted assets. They're your most valuable asset. That's why they're targeted the most. They don't need to be a cybersecurity specialist. We don't need them to know about absolutely everything that happens in the world. But if you just think about some of the examples that Jamie's talked about, a lot of those could have been potentially prevented if people were more aware about how to do their job from stopping people coming into the building, stopping having conversations whilst having a cigarette outside, for example, or whilst meeting up with some colleagues from wider industries in a venue like the hotel that Jamie, I'm going to say, exfiltrated there. But the idea really is that if you educate them in this space, again, you help them stay safe in their own personal lives too. And I think that's a massively important piece here. If they're happy and secure in their work life, they won't take, in their personal life, they also won't take risks in their work life. But really just drawing this to some of the key cybersecurity pieces here, I'll draw you to number 3 and 8, tabletop exercises and appropriate response actions to be established. The NTSC and others admittedly provide a number of free examples of what these exercises should look like. So you can be prepared for the if and when an active attack really occurs. But finally, on number 10, if you feel that you don't have a dedicated team for security, maybe you're looking to bolster that team's capabilities, engage with a third-party managed security provider or service. If you recognize the need for such a service, engage them before the worst happens, before a breach is encountered. The last thing you want here to do is to pay a recovery cost, as Jamie was talking about in one of those other hotels, twice in some cases, and then go back and pay for a security subscription service thereafter. That makes for a much tougher budgetary conversation than just a preventative investment. And really, a lot of this all echoes where we're seeing the cybersecurity insurance industry go as well. A lot of customers that I now talk to are saying that unless you have got EDR solutions and can prove that somebody is managing it on a day-to-day basis, your premiums will be a lot higher, or we won't insure you full stop. And if we don't have insurance, then actually, do we have the means to pay for the remediation off the cuff? Have we got the means to pay for third-party solutions to come in as a way to help us should the worst happen? Again, having these things in place, I think, is always the best thing to do before we have a breach. It's all about educating ultimately our board from a strategic level to make them aware of what has happened in the past to other people in the same sorts of spaces. And that's why we do these types of webinars. It's not always about the big scale attacks from Microsoft vulnerabilities or otherwise. Having somebody like Jamie on these types of webinars really emphasizes that it really can be anybody at any point in your work journey that can be the sole purpose of trying to get to know you, to exfiltrate data from your environment, to make them money, as it were. And cyber insurance isn't silly. They are very much aware of this, and so they have now changed their requirements to match this, to make sure that organizations are doing everything that they can. So I'm from Sophos, as you know. I'm wearing a big Sophos top as it stands. So just to really finish this off, we have got many things that can help across the attack chain surface, whether it's just across our endpoint with our multiple layers of defense, or indeed whether it's across our secure access portfolio when it comes to network security, locally, in the cloud, in small sites and homes, or even all the way through to our zero trust networking access capability. I mentioned about those disparate environments, all those third-party solutions in the past. If we're authenticating them with a zero trust means, we can help stave off against ransomware attacks against that type of data. It's not always about MFA, but being able to have health status of a device is really important. Do you have AV installed? Are you up to date? Do you have any vulnerabilities that currently haven't been patched or haven't been dealt with? If any of the answer to that is no, then sorry, Mr. User, even though you've got your MFA credentials, zero trust network access won't allow you to access our secure data. So it's a really big part of this very disparate network model that we live in today. And all of this very much echoes the Sophos strategy. We call it the adaptive cybersecurity ecosystem. We provide countless solutions across software and hardware, but really after mentioning incident response, I would be doing a disservice to my team here if I didn't mention the services on the right-hand side. We offer a full managed threat response service, 24/7 security operations center. It includes all incident response for free. There's no additional retainers. There's no additional cybersecurity policies required. And if you're not a Sophos customer, you can benefit from our rapid response service if you are undergoing an active attack as well. So the example that Jamie had up on the screen around the phishing attack that led to a 2.5 million ransomware demand, they called in our rapid response service to help them get out of that active adversary threat at that time. So I wanted to keep all that very brief. Hopefully today has been useful for you. If there have been any questions in the chat, I will have a look for them now. But if I can advise you to do any looking around any of the stats that we've talked about, some of the stats Jamie's mentioned, that I've mentioned, they're all available at sophos.com/threat reports. Simo, back over to you, mate. Is there anything in the Q&A?
Yep. Yeah, we got a couple. So one's a nice quick one, which is around the sources of the stats that you shared, Jamie, in your presentation, whether or not we're able to get some of the sources of where they come from, or if that's your own internal.
Yeah, we can, I can get the sources after this. I should have really made a note actually on each slide, but I'll go back through them and get the sources, and then I'll make them available to you guys. So when you put this online or distribute this, you can see the sources where the information came from there.
Lovely, thank you very much. And then another one, which is, what's the best and worst case cost? Best and worst case cost for a response to an attack on both a 10 to 99 user and 100 to 500 user business, specifically looking at or aligned to ransomware?
I guess that one's a really hard one to answer. And actually the way that, for example, our rapid response team quote is on a basis of what's happening at the time. So it's not specifically restricted to the number of users or devices. It depends on what the scenario is and how much effort's required. What I will say is that once we have agreed a cost, it's a fixed 45-day engagement. So even if we take 40 days to get rid of the active adversary, that is all included as part of that cost. We don't do any pre-retainers at this point in time to go and buy it in advance. In fact, the way to get rapid response included from one of our services is by having the managed threat response service. Actually works out cheaper to invest in that service over 12 months than a lot of the times to invest in that rapid response for 45 days. So if you're trying to think about figures to have maybe on a budgetary back burner, the better place to start, I think, would be finding out the costs for your environment or maybe your customers' environments based on the numbers that you provided there for the full service, as those will work out more budgetary friendly, I believe.
Yeah, I suppose from a Bytes perspective and my experience, it's always been, as you can probably imagine, cheaper to be on the protection side rather than obviously wait until the worst case scenario and obviously look at a response action once it's happened. So yeah, obviously kind of taking in the full levels of protection and trying to make us reduce the gaps as much as possible. As kind of Jamie's mentioned, there's so much to it now, so it is hard to kind of looking at that from a wider angle as well.
Yeah, just kind of a point moving on from that as well. So again, you know, it depends on your organization and what you've got. You could be an MSP with 80 employees, but manage 1,400 companies with 10,000 end users, you know, and they could also be affected as part of your breach or attack, or ransomware being distributed, you know, like from SolarWinds as a prime example, to other providers that you guys utilize. So it's really, you know, I think what Costa and his team and Sophos need to do is fully understand what it is that you do as an organization and what data that you actually have. So you can't just pluck a figure and say it's going to be £2 million, you know, as a cleanup operation in a sense, because there's so many different data points and variables and factors that make up your organization.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts to it, and I think really, as we've tried to allude to here as well, if you are having to pay for an incident response service once the worst has happened, you're effectively potentially going to be paying more because you're paying recovery costs, you're paying rebuild costs, you know, hopefully you're not paying the ransom, but then you may find that the business would look to invest in a service thereafter to make sure that it never happens again, right? So really the best thing to do, and I see it's been put in the chat as well, have a conversation with Mark at Bytes and his team, have a conversation with us and see what we can scope out. Everything can be costed according to your needs as opposed to some figures that may not be the most accurate in terms of costings at this point.
Yeah, perfect. I have put a link to one of our endpoint market reviews that we run with customers free of charge. Part of that, we can start looking into some of those costs as well. What that would be from a prevention, kind of looking at the solution and making sure that you are protected, as Costa kind of rightly said, against what potentially could be something beyond that. But yeah, obviously, like I say, it's hypothetical. Let's quickly read this one. Okay, cool. Yeah, James, hopefully that was useful for you anyway. And then again, if you do need anything, then feel free to reach out, and happy to support on some more of those stats, etc. I believe that's it from the questions, unless there is anything for anyone else who is still online with us. I'll give it another 30 seconds. But if nothing else comes through, then we'll wrap up there.
In which case, I guess just want to say thank you very much, everybody, for your time. Hopefully it was useful, and hopefully you got to learn some cool stuff from Jamie's experiences. Hopefully, I think, Mark, you were saying earlier on, it's Freedom Day at the moment, right? So maybe the next version of this, Jamie can actually test you out and see if he can glean anything from you in real life.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
Yeah. Have a good day. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.